Hello and welcome to our 11th lesson on botany today, our 10th video lesson. Make sure you have your lesson book and your pencils there with you, and we'll go ahead and we'll get started for the day. As always, let's focus our mind with our opening verse. Tall as a tree I stand, for reach my roots in the earth, and warmth fills my heart with love. So as you can see, this is our second to last class. Today we're going to talk about two different types of plants that are actually flowering plants, interestingly enough, the cactus and the palm. And even though they may not look traditionally like some of the flowering plants that we often think of, they are in fact flowering plants. I do have a lot of other things for you as well since we are heading into our last week, so I will talk to you about those shortly. But first, let's go ahead and let's get started today. So the first thing I want to look at here is our opening for our palm trees. So we can say our beautiful towering palms, they use all of their energy to reach up high towards the sun. So they are like our birch and like our oak. They are true trees. They are flowering trees. And we're going to look at them and I'm going to talk a little bit about why that is here in just a moment. But if you've ever been around palm trees or if you know anything about palm trees, they're really interesting because unlike some of our other trees that branch out, they go straight all the way way up into the sky, and then they take all their energy to make these beautiful palm leaves, and also flowering parts and fruit or nuts, something like that. So they grow very, very tall. They're really interesting. They do look a lot like cycads, but they are in fact not cycads, and we'll talk about why that is here in just a moment. But for now, go ahead and give yourself an introduction page to your palm trees. So now we come to the different parts of the palm tree. In this specific example, we're talking about the date palm. So if you've ever had dates, they're these small little brown fruits, and they're very, very, very sweet. They're often used in dishes that require a real sweet flavor to them. Um, you can see moving from the bottom up to the top. So our date palm has roots that extend out from a larger bulb-like structure. Now, similar to our cycad, when they start to grow up from that bulb-like structure, you'll have what are called leaf scars as the leaves grow up and fall off. So that trunk will often have small ridges on it where the leaves grew and then they fell off. So, but that trunk it'll grow straight all the way up to the crown of the tree where our very familiar palm fronds come out. From that part, you will have some type of fruiting branch. Okay, in the example of the date palm. This is the flowering part of the tree. So if you remember when we talked about birch and we talked about oak, we talked about how the catkins are the flowers of those trees. In this case, with the date palm, we have this fruiting branch that is the flower part of the tree. And as we've talked about often, that flowering part creates some type of nut or fruit or seed pod. So in this case, that flat fruiting branch is where you will find those. Now, we talked a lot about how they look similar to cycads, and many of our cycads are called palm trees, but they're not true palm trees. So what is the difference? So if you remember back to conifers and cycads, so we had angiosperms and gymnosperms. So if you remember, the gymnosperms are cycads, okay, and are conifers. If you looked inside, they had that cone structure, and if you looked inside, you could see the seeds in those plants, okay? With the palm trees, we have a true flowering structure, and we have an enclosed seed, okay? So the date, for example, the seed is inside. You cannot see the seed in the date, okay? So that is what the difference between our palm trees and our cycads is. So you can see the seeds in cycads. You cannot see the seeds in palm trees. So they are, in fact, rather different, even though they often look similar, and sometimes the names are used interchangeably. So the next type of plant that we're going to talk about is also a flowering plant. So take a minute and draw your date palm, and then we will go on to our next type of plant. So now we're going to talk about cactus. So there's so many different types of cactus, and they grow in so many different ways. You can see some examples here, the barrel cactus, and on the bottom left-hand side, and the saguaro on the right-hand side. They grow in lots of different ways, but they have all grown to suit the harsh desert environment. Okay, so they look a little funny. They look a little different than the flowering plants that we usually think of, right? But they are, in fact, flowering plants. Okay, so take a moment and make your cactus page, and then we'll talk a little bit about a different type of cactus that you see from the ones you see here. So the type of cactus I want to talk about today is the prickly pear cactus. I actually have one of these growing out in front of my house. I live in Arizona, so I see a lot of these cactuses on a daily basis. So the prickly pear cactus has what are called pads, these flat, roundish structures that are like leaves. So these are, in this case, they are similar, can be associated with the leaves that we see in our other different types of flowering plants. Um, they also have flowers. Okay, so that prickly pear cactus will grow a flower, and if you were to look inside of that flower on that cactus would have the same types of structures as that flowering plant that we looked at the different parts of way back in the beginning. Okay, and as we know by now, where we have flowers, we often have some type of fruit. The prickly pear is no different in this case. So we have the prickly pear flower. From that prickly pear flower grows the prickly pear fruit. Okay, so these when they come out during the correct season, people like to harvest prickly pear fruit, and you have to have a pair of gloves to do it, or just like with any cactus, you're going to get stuck, right? Um, so people come and they harvest the prickly pear fruit, and they make things like fruity beverages or prickly pear jam. So there's actually a lot that you can do with these prickly pear fruits, and people here where I live do actually do those things. Um, the interesting thing, so we see a pad or leaf, but eventually, the older that prickly pear gets, it will actually begin to grow a trunk, what looks like a trunk. And sometimes it can be confusing if you're looking at a mass of plants and maybe there's trees and there's prickly pear and there's other things around. Um, those prickly pear trunks are going to look similar to the tree trunks. And sometimes it's hard to distinguish because when we think of them, we often just think of what we see here in the paths with the spikes on them and the flowers and the prickly pear fruit, but they actually do grow trunks as well. So go ahead and draw that prickly pear with all of his spines there and his beautiful pads and flowers and fruit. And when you are finished, we will talk about what we will be doing to wrap things up today. All right, so we've nearly come to the end of our class. Um, you have a plant study that is due today, that your last plant study is due today. Um, you will have a post where you can share your lesson book. If you would like to share maybe just a few pages, or what would be even better, if you would make a video and you would show us all the beautiful pages in your lesson book. We do still have one more class to go where we're going to be talking about types of leaves and um, lily and rose and monocots and dicots. So if you want to wait, certainly you can, but I am going to go ahead. I will post that today. You do have your final plant study, which is due in our next class, our last class, class 12. And then you also have a hands-on project that we talked about back at the beginning. I will post a thread for you to post that as well. So we are winding down, one more video lesson to go. The class message boards and things the class won't actually close until a week actually after our last class, but if you go into the transcripts section of OutSchool, you should be able to find our class if you want to come back to it at any time in the future. So don't forget that. As always, if you have any questions, please let me know. And otherwise, we will wrap up for the day with our closing verse. Now that all my work has ended, what I've learned I'll put to rest, always knowing, always seeing that I have done my best. Wisdom and power and love will grow, and I will bless all people that I know. Bye, guys.